Today we're going to be discussing biography and what you should be looking for when you read or watch biographies. We'll be covering autobiography and memoir in a later lesson. Why is biography so popular? For the same reason sequels are popular. If the audience already knows the characters, they are already engaged in the story. That makes it easier to get financing and to promote it than an original story. Audiences tend to be interested in knowing more about both the people they love and those they hate. Casting big stars to play other famous people also generates publicity for the film, and movie stars plus publicity often results in awards. Biographies are a win-win for everyone in the film business. Guess who is the most popular subject for film biography? Our old buddy Abe. He has appeared as a character in over 70 films, the first in 1908. Poor Chester Arthur only has 4 credits as a minor character. On a side note, once, when Dr. Wineland was teaching this class, he and a student had an argument over whether there was ever a president named Chester Arthur. There was a student who argued with him and said there was never a president named Chester. If you are in doubt, you should learn the presidents. What makes a president or any other person interesting to writers and filmmakers is not necessarily what makes them important to historians. Lincoln shows up so often because he was president during the U.S. Civil War, during a time of tremendous social and technological change, and he was assassinated. He is also visually striking and easily recognizable, even if he's not the main character. President Woodrow Wilson, however, is also an extremely important president. He served in the White House during World War I and designed the League of Nations, the forerunner to the United Nations. His term saw the creation of the federal income tax system, the Federal Reserve Bank, and the Federal Trade Commission. Do you want to see a film about the creation of the modern financial system? No, neither does anyone else. The 1944 film Wilson is 2.5 hours long of boring. So you can expect to see Lincoln live on in popular culture while Chester Arthur and Woodrow Wilson slide out of the public consciousness. Likewise, not all subjects are cinematic. Head-to-head competition makes a great storyline, but even though there are some really good films about chess players, they don't do quite as well with the public as boxing movies. Athletes and entertainers are inherently more visually exciting than scientists, politicians, artists, or writers. Some people's lives never seem to lose public interest. Princess Diana and Michael Jackson keep showing up on magazine covers long after their deaths because people still buy them. These personas live on as products, licensed and marketed as commodities for mass consumption. So let's look at some of the problems and tricky elements to consider when analyzing a biography. The first is scope. How much of a person's life is covered? Birth to death? Or just a few days of an important incident? How do you condense an entire life into one narrative? Real lives don't have storylines, and including every detail would be both impossible and boring. Still, if you leave something out, you open yourself up to criticism. People are complex. Even a book is not enough to cover everything in a person's life. Robert Caro has spent decades writing about just one subject, Lyndon Johnson, and the books are great. Caro won the Pulitzer Prize in 1975. He won a Lifetime Achievement Award in 2016, and to date has written over 3,000 pages of biography just on Johnson. His latest best-selling book is an autobiography, all about how he, Robert Caro, writes about Lyndon Johnson. That's a lot of detail. A Beautiful Mind, the book, and the film adaptation about the mathematician John Nash have different scopes. The book by Sylvia Nasser is a pretty thorough biography from birth to the end of his life. The film starts when Nash is in graduate school. While both versions deal with Nash's mathematical theories and debilitating mental illness, the book covers Nash's child out of wedlock and his homosexual relationships. The film leaves these out. In the book, Nash comes across as a real jerk. In the film, Nash becomes more of a sympathetic hero. Consequently, the film was criticized for not depicting the real John Nash. But how can any 2-hour story adequately represent a real person? Which brings us to point of view. When you are analyzing a biography, ask yourself, who is telling the story and why? Is it to mythologize or celebrate the subject? If the subject comes across as perfect, this is called a hagiography. Or is it to demonize and condemn the subject? This is also known as a hatchet job. Is it written to confirm public perceptions or to tell the real truth? This is a major issue in books, especially in contemporary political writing. For instance, as you can clearly see, Hillary Clinton is a born leader, courageous, religious, and inspiring to children. She is also evil, gay, corrupt, and a fulfillment of biblical prophecy. It's important to remember that writers and filmmakers have no legal obligation to fairness, completeness, or even truthfulness. Subjects are free to sue for libel or slander, but the First Amendment usually comes down on the writer's side of the law. You may also want to ask, what is the source material? What is this book or film based on? Interviews? Public records? Did they buy the rights to someone's story? Was it previously published material? Is it unauthorized or authorized, meaning did the subject cooperate? Author Kitty Kelley made a career out of writing salacious, unauthorized biographies filled with shocking revelations. Did mob-connected singer Frank Sinatra really have an affair with First Lady Nancy Reagan? It sure sold a lot of books to say they did, although no credible evidence was ever produced. Also consider the era in which it was made. Many pre-1960 biographies were sanitized to eliminate homosexuality, alcohol and drug addictions, infidelity, children born out of wedlock, general jerkiness, and other details contrary to a positive public image. However, today, biographies sometimes go too far the other way, wallowing in sleaze to attract an audience. Up until the 1950s, up through his death in the 1980s, popular pianist Liberace would have you believe that only his demanding career and devotion to his mother kept him from settling down with the right girl. Although there were always rumors, and it was pretty obvious to everyone that Liberace was homosexual, in 1959 he successfully sued a British magazine for suggesting he was gay and was awarded over $20,000. That was a lot at the time. Liberace later said he was so hurt by the allegations that he cried all the way to the bank. Even as late as the 1980s, when his ex-boyfriend Scott Thorson sued him for $1 million, Liberace still denied that he was gay. It wasn't until 2013, 25 years after Liberace's death, that a film based on Thorson's versions of events portrayed him as a homosexual in very graphic terms. Different points in history have different standards what's considered acceptable public knowledge or appropriate entertainment. Consider artistic license. This is an idea that in addition to deciding how much of a story to tell and what to put in or leave out, the filmmaker also has the freedom to make some things up to better tell the story. In the film Patriots Day, Mark Wahlberg plays a composite character who represents a number of different people combined into one. This composite policeman character was created to connect to all the real people in the true story of the Boston Marathon bombing and the subsequent manhunt. The middle photo is from the film The Fighter, in which boxer Mickey Ward's 7 sisters are heightened characters, written as dramatically and comically awful people. His real-life sisters were not happy about their portrayal on screen, but the film sisters were one of the best parts of the film and played an important role in dramatizing the unpleasantness of Mickey's family life in a succinct manner. The last photo is from A Beautiful Mind, in which Paul Bettany plays an imaginary character created to illustrate John Nash's schizophrenia. Is the story a Romana Clef? That is, did they just change the names of the characters so they wouldn't get sued? When a Romana Clef is first released, it's usually very current, and no one is fooled by the name change. Everyone knew that Citizen Kane was really about publisher William Randolph Hearst. Hearst waged a publicity and legal campaign to kill the film. Primary Colors is about Bill Clinton, but he just ignored it, even though it was written by one of his campaign staff. Years later, though, the connection is not so obvious. What do you know about William Randolph Hearst? At the time the film was made, he was one of the most famous and powerful people in the nation. But since he means nothing to you, you would not find this film shocking or scandalous. President Clinton's first presidential campaign is nearly 30 years in the past now, so the number of people who will get all the black humor in this film is dwindling. Making an unauthorized biography of a living person can be risky. The subject can fight back against inaccuracy both in court and in the media. Here is a comically uncomfortable meeting on Saturday Night Live between Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg and actor Jesse Eisenberg, who portrayed him in the film as a real jerk. Aside from this appearance, Zuckerberg hardly even acknowledged the film. He continues to be a prominent public figure, while the film version becomes outdated. Your opinions on Facebook and Zuckerberg probably have little or nothing to do with the film, The Social Network. Sometimes even long-dead historical figures remain too hot to handle, usually because U.S. filmmakers are not aware of popular sentiment in other cultures. The sympathetic portrayal of Marxist revolutionary Che Guevara in the 2004 film The Motorcycle Diaries upset many in Latin America, but there wasn't too much pushback in the United States. However, in 1998, there was organized protest from Greek Americans against a Hollywood biopic of Turkish President Kemal Ataturk, starring Antonio Banderas. The New York Times quoted one protester describing Ataturk as a savage maniac who was also a child molester of both sexes, a mass murderer, a destroyer of Greek civilization, and in general a disgrace to human civilization as we know it. Ataturk is considered the father of modern Turkey and is arguably one of the most important political figures of the early 20th century, but he is still too controversial to put in a Hollywood film. The project was abandoned. However, if the subject of a biographical film or book is not already famous, or at least currently well known, how would you know if the portrayal is accurate or fair? Two of these women are world famous. One of them is my mother. You might know a little about Elizabeth Taylor, but how would you know if what I told you about Sarah Kargas or Gene Simmons was true or not? And how do you even know which of the other two is the film star and which one is my mother? If I told you an entertaining or exciting story about any of them, you would be inclined to accept it. Why would I lie? Part of your job is to find out if the storytellers are lying and why. You already have background knowledge and bias when it comes to portrayals of Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders. But which accusation and insults between Martin Van Buren and Richard Johnson are fair or accurate? Do the research. Don't be influenced by presentation. Old news isn't necessarily true news, and when looking at biography, you can never really know the whole story.